when President Biden excused his appeasement, and right in the middle of his speech, he was explaining his advisors had said to just abandon, leave now. And then he threw in, it was not on the teleprompter, I have letters. Okay, I sent him and asked that night, I asked for copies of the letters of the advice that he received to abandon the people of Afghanistan. And it should not surprise you, but every 2 months, I send a letter to the White House asking for the letters. There are no letters. They've not been revealed. But what advice was given by his advisors on leaving the people of Afghanistan to fall off jets as the abandonment took place?
Well, I believe that our military, under the leadership of the president and the chain of command, did an admirable job in a very difficult set of circumstances to get as many people out. Some 125,000 people were brought out. So I associate myself with your praise of our military. I had the honor of serving with them in Afghanistan and in Iraq, and they have done an outstanding job for the people of the United States, for our security. With regard to what you mentioned, sir, about the letters and advice, I do not have a direct knowledge of what it is that was involved there. But the advice was to bring out as many people as possible, to reach out to as many Americans and those who had worked for us or for organizations that worked for us, to bring them out, and a huge number was brought out.
Again, thank you for your service. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Sherman.
Throughout the relevant period, we had two choices. Keep a force there, particularly with air power, and be prepared to incur modest casualties, or pull out. The foreign policy establishment wanted to stay. The dissent cables said stay. The politicians promised the American people we would pull out, not because our casualties were particularly large, but because they were on top of 20 years of war. We were defeated militarily in achieving our full goals in Afghanistan, not by the Taliban, but by the phrase, forever war. Once that phrase was coined, the American people demanded we withdraw. Now, I know there's pressure on the chairman to politicize this committee and achieve the political objectives of his party. But this hearing is going to give politicalization of a bad name, because it is the worst issue for the Republicans to bring up. Because, Ambassador, this agreement, this Doha agreement, is the worst agreement I could imagine. I don't blame you. Because President Trump, well, you had testified in your testimony, by the end of 2018, it was well known that President Trump's decision was to bring all American forces home from Afghanistan. In 2019, on the anniversary of 9/11, he invited them to Camp David. And just before the November 2020 election, President Trump stated, "We will have the small remaining number of our brave men and women serving in Afghanistan home by Christmas." So the only leverage you had over the Taliban is maybe we will take that foreign policy approach and keep our Air Force capacity there. And you've got the president saying, President Trump saying, they're all home by Christmas, every single one of them. So this is the worst agreement I could imagine. Ambassador, is there anything in the agreement where the Taliban commit themselves to allowing 13-year-old girls to go to school? I didn't find anything like that. Is there in there?
The Taliban, there is nothing in the agreement. The issues dealing with the future of Afghanistan was to be negotiated.
But the agreement itself, the purpose of this hearing is to say, why didn't we enforce the agreement?
Right.
But when the Taliban treats 12-year-old girls like sex slaves, when they kill members of the LGBT community, when they kill anyone who converts from Islam to Christianity, They are not in violation of this agreement that we are having a hearing to saying, why are we enforcing? They're not in violation. You can't enforce. We entered into agreement in which they agreed to do nothing more than talk to the Afghan government. They talked. They decided they wanted to kill LGBTQ community. They wanted to kill what they call apostates. They wanted to basically enslave half the human race, the female half. So this agreement was so bad that the chairman attacks President Biden for not withdrawing from it. This is an agreement entered into by the man who claims he's the best negotiator in the world, President Trump. I will say that we did achieve one objective, and that is Afghanistan is not uniquely situated to serve as a base for terrorism against America. And in fact, there's been more terrorism coming out of Afghanistan, killing Iranians in Iran, than killing Americans. There's no such thing as a easy withdrawal. Russia, as the ambassador pointed out, Russia and Britain had very messy withdrawals from Afghanistan, and our withdrawal from Vietnam was messy as well. That was particularly true when every English-speaking Afghan I had any acquaintance with was trying to leave. The idea that the average grunt in Afghanistan would stay and fight is absurd. But I do have one more question, and that is, the Republicans have said that somehow we should have gone all over Afghanistan and collected our $85 billion worth of weapons, presumably from people who knew that they could keep them for their own self-defense or sell them to the Taliban. Could we have, by force, taken back our weapons everywhere in Afghanistan on our way out without casualties?
Thank you, sir. As you know, the weapons that were left behind were weapons that we thought was safe to leave behind for the government of Afghanistan.
Even if we had realized the government was useless, could we have seized them without casualties?
Now we're speculating because the government, we assume, would not fall apart.
Ambassador, it was more of a rhetorical question.
So,
if people have weapons they want to hold on to, you can't take them away if you're not willing to incur some casualties. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Ambassador, I'm over here. In September of 2020, you appeared before the House Oversight Committee and testified that the U.S. troop withdrawal would be determined based, and I'm going to quote you, based on conditions on the ground and delivery by the Taliban on their commitments. Did you or Secretary Blinken advocate for an extension on the withdrawal date, considering the poor planning behind the final evacuation as it occurred?
As I said, sir, 4 months were added to the timetable, moving from 14 to 18. But as I said again, the decision was made to withdraw at the end of August and not to link it to any conditions that you might have in mind.
Well, that was your quote, conditions. So I think Americans have in mind that it would be a condition-based withdrawal, which makes sense. You provide some kind of, when I say you, our adversary, so to speak, you provide some level of compliance with the agreement that we can see, and then we'll give you a little. But that's not what occurred. I'm just wondering if you can name a single concession made by the Taliban during the time period between the April 14th announcement by President Biden of total withdrawal and the fall of Afghanistan. What concessions?
Well, one concession was that they acquiesced to the addition of 4 months that we demanded.
Of foreign what?
4 months was
4 months.
demanded of additional time. They could have rejected it and gone back to fighting. They didn't. They acquiesced. 2, they agreed not to enter Kabul when we asked. They agreed to sit and agree to a government with, that would include the members of the Republican side, the government side. So
But those agreements, as you know, were hollow because they took more and more and more of the government under their control, which was not in the Doha agreement, which was not what was considered, which was not what was agreed to.
Well,
And they did invade Kabul.
well, they did because they agreed not to, and then there was to be
So they lied to
negotiations.
us. So that wasn't based, so the withdrawal was not based on conditions on the ground. And I'm wondering, did you convey these concerns to President Biden during the continuing negotiations about the blatant violations? They were blatant, but the whole world saw them as they were occurring.
Certainly, I'm not here to defend the behavior of the Talibs or the Taliban.
None of us are. I get that.
But I believe that
I'm trying
insisting on additional conditions.
We're not asking for additional conditions, just the conditions that they agreed to. And I'm trying to determine, knowing that, you knew that.
Sure.
The world saw that.
Right.
The president saw that. I'm assuming, maybe I shouldn't be, but I'm assuming you advised him of that. The secretary advised him of that, but he proceeded anyway.
He proceeded to withdraw forces because he believed if he persisted, we'll be back to a fight. And he didn't want to do that.
So, just out of curiosity in the remaining time, who chose the 20th anniversary of 9/11 as the final evacuation day?
I actually do not know that.
Did you ever question that? I mean, maybe it's not as important and impactful to you as it for the rest of Americans, but that's pretty significant.
I agree with that, but I think, therefore, an adjustment was made to the end of August as the final date of withdrawal.
But it was September 11th.
The initial announcement, it was, as you know as well as I do, but I think...
You don't know who made the decision.
I do not. Well, the president obviously made the decision, but I don't know who advised them on choosing that
Well,
date.
the president's the commander-in-chief regardless of who advised him. Now, it was said that the president wanted to withdraw, and you even kind of just reminded us because it was to protect American lives and to lessen the loss of American lives. But you would also concede that the time coming into that, during the previous administration, there had been no loss of American lives. And once the decision was made and the plan executed, there was a horrific loss of American lives.
Well, the loss of life that didn't occur under President Trump's
We'll never know
administration.
what didn't occur, sir. What we know did occur, and that the previous administration's plan coming into it, during that period of time, a long period of time, there were no loss of American service members' lives.
Because of the agreement.
No, it wasn't because of the agreement. The Taliban wasn't following the agreement or abiding by the agreement.
Well,
it was because the president let the Taliban know that if they killed an American lives, it was going to be over for them. I yield the balance.
Yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First off, as a Gold Star family member myself, my uncle was killed in action. I just want to recognize and thank the families that are here. I want to be sure we thank first and foremost and give our eternal gratitude to their service and their sacrifice. The purpose of undertaking the overall investigation of Afghanistan was to look to 20-plus years and to try and find out lessons learned, things that we could do differently. And the goal is, and I think I share it, and I'm sure the families here share it, to prevent future lives from being lost. Can we learn something over this period of time that will save other families and save other brave Americans from that sacrifice? So that's my goal over 20 years looking at this. And I can't really sit here at this moment in time talking about saving future American lives without just indicating something else that's happening right here in this House right now, and that's not acting on aid to Ukraine. Why is that relevant to this? Because when we can fund Ukrainians defending themselves against an illegal war from a Russia that's a direct and present danger to the United States and our allies. And we can confront this threat with funding Ukraine, and by doing that, confront Russia, deter other threats that could be in China and Taiwan in the process, and keep young American men and women from being deployed under Article 5. If Ukraine falls, Putin has made it clear he's going into the Baltic states, which are NATO states. So as in the theme of trying to save future American lives, I hope that the Speaker has the courage to even allow democracy that so many people fought for a chance to have a vote on this. Now, when it comes to Ukraine, Mr. Ambassador, I didn't get to choose who's here. I didn't get to choose the title that says the Biden administration failed. Again, I prefer to look at this over 20 years, plus years. But I would quote, given the comments of some of my colleagues, a quote from former U.S. Ambassador John Bass, who said our main policy efforts, and he was the ambassador, as you're aware,
He was.
Under President Trump. Our main policy efforts not only didn't reinforce each other, they contradicted each other. These contradictory signals were amplified by President Trump's periodic statements supporting rapid force reductions. Taken together, they undermined Afghans' confidence in a U.S. security commitment and in their own armed service and government, something that you alluded to, Mr. Ambassador, that the lack of confidence that spelled itself out with the Afghan government and their military. I guess I'll just leave with this and hope that we can undertake as a committee really our emphasis on what went wrong, what we can learn from our military, learn from our diplomats. There was plenty that went wrong, and it had dire consequences in many instances. But in terms of limiting this hearing to how the Biden administration failed, I'll just end with one quote. And that quote occurred on June 26th, 2021. It was at a political campaign rally afterwards by the former president. And quote, I started this process. All the troops are coming home. They couldn't stop this process, unquote. So let's not have this hearing center on who is the last person holding the ball when the music ended, but rather sincerely looking at what we can do to prevent other tragedies, what we can learn from this, and how we can save young American men and women from being in harm's way when they don't have to be. They have the courage to be there when they have to be. The decisions that are made are not there. I'll never forget when I first became a congressman, I went to one of our members serving, in a war zone, and I asked him what he thought about the war, and he said, well, sir, my job is to serve.
Right.
That question is yours to answer, respectfully. That's why we're here. That's why we're trying to learn. That's why we're trying to save more American lives in the future. And I yield back.
Thank you.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Ms. Wagner.
I thank the chairman. I thank the ambassador for being here and for his service. Today, more than 2 years after the Biden administration's shameful, tragic, and utterly misguided flight from Afghanistan, it has become clear that the president was determined to abandon the country at any cost and with no conditions. The cost in lost military assets and our credibility as a friend and ally and global leader, and most of all, in precious American lives, was incalculable. Again and again, the administration proved that it was willing to simply cede Afghanistan to the Taliban, irrespective of the Taliban's clear intent to ignore all commitments and agreements. The responsibility for the absolute debacle in Afghanistan rests on this administration's shoulders, period. And there must be accountability. There has been no accountability for the administration's total failure to protect U.S. troops and citizens. Ambassador Khalilzad, Did countries in NATO argue against a full U.S. troop withdrawal?
They did,
They did.
subject to a political agreement, as I mentioned to the chairman.
How did Russia and China respond to the Taliban takeover?
I don't know for sure, but it seems to me that they would have preferred a political settlement. They stated at least that they would have preferred a political settlement. I was always suspicious of their motivations. Sometimes they would want a political settlement, but they knew that there is no easy path to a political settlement. They also would have liked to have kept us in Afghanistan in a difficult situation, doing what they wanted us to do in part, which is to get the terrorists that were focused on them eliminated by us and paying a price without winning. So we had to be careful in terms of
Ambassador,
Russian and
I know that this was touched on
Chinese
before,
activities,
but
yes.
A-
I
Afghanistan-
could talk some more if we were in a different setting about their policies, but this is what I can say
Thank
in
you.
this
Thank you.
setting.
I appreciate that. And it's more concerning to me that NATO was against a full troop withdrawal.
Right.
Afghanistan, and this was touched on, is now ranked worst of 177 countries in terms of the status of women, according to the Peace Research Institute of Oslo. Did you believe the Taliban would respect women's rights and allow girls to go to school?
I did not trust them. They did make statements on record, video statements, that they would allow girls to go to school, to all the way to not only college but to PhD. This is on the record that they have made, but
But they didn't do
they
it.
have not lived up to it.
You didn't do it. They didn't do it,
They didn't
and you
do
didn't
it.
trust them.
Right.
Why didn't U.S. negotiators press the Taliban to extend the withdrawal date beyond August 31 to facilitate the evacuation?
That was, of course, the president's decision not to. He had asked for 4 months, as I mentioned before, but that was his decision not to ask for an additional extension.
President Biden's.
President Biden, yes.
Taliban issued threats to attack U.S. troops if they stayed longer than the August 31 deadline. Ambassador, did you consider this to be the actions of a responsible partner of peace?
Well, that consideration that if an additional extension was asked for, it wasn't asked. But if an additional extension was asked for, perhaps it could lead to this restart of the fight. And that's why perhaps the decision was made not to ask for more time.
Well, they threatened our U.S. troops
Right.
if they stayed 1 day longer than August 31. What was your assessment throughout 2021 of whether the Taliban was meeting the conditions of the Doha Agreement? How about in April of 2021?
Well, it always was my personal judgment that to get the Taliban to do what they have agreed to do, we have to respond with our commitments in a way that incentivizes them to do what they have committed to do, meaning that we wouldn't do what we have committed to unless they do what they have committed to doing. That was my point of view, and that was my advice.
My time has ended here, and I yield back. Thank you.
Delay yields. Chair recognizes Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ambassador, for your testimony today. In your prepared testimony, you said, quote, by the end of 2018, as is well known, the President's decision was to bring home American forces from Afghanistan. We've also heard testimony in multiple closed-door transcribed interviews with senior State Department officials to this effect. In other words, that the withdrawal of all U.S. troops from Afghanistan began in February 2020 as part of the agreement you negotiated between the United States and the Taliban. Can you provide examples of how President Trump's decision to withdraw all U.S. troops was apparent and, quote, well known beginning in 2018?
Well, and the president tweeted to that effect multiple times. I would give a reference to Secretary Pompeo's book in which he documents the president's determination. And of course, when I had my meetings with the president, he always made that clear, that that was the objective.
So let me ask you, so it's fair to say the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan began as a result of the February 2020 Doha Agreement under President Trump?
Indeed.
And do you believe that sentiment to withdraw all troops was known or suspected by the Taliban when you were negotiating with them? And what informs this belief?
Well, the public statements, sometimes the Taliban would say that I was not following in my negotiations the letter of or the spirit of what was being said publicly by saying we would only withdraw if certain conditions are met. Why sometimes statements would be made that created the impression as if we would withdraw regardless. So
you feel like that was undermining at the time you're negotiating?
Well, but that's for others to judge. But the challenge is, as I described, the challenge was, as